Imagine you are 21 years old living in Kathmandu. Your brother works in Dubai and sends money back home each month. Your mother depends on his calls to coordinate household expenses. Suddenly, with one announcement, that channel is gone. At the same time, you scroll your feed and you see the children of politicians celebrating wealth as if nothing is going wrong. It's not just a communication that is lost, it's the trust in the states that governs you.
เพราะสไลด์ที่สวยอาจจะไม่ใช่สไลด์ที่ Impact Productive Presentation with AI คือคอร์สเรียนสดออนไลน์ที่จะเปลี่ยนวิธีการนำเสนอของคุณด้วยพลังของ AI Tools และวิธีคิดที่จะช่วยสร้างสไลด์ที่ได้ทั้งเร็วและผลลัพธ์ที่ Impact เหมาะสำหรับคนทำงานที่ต้องนำเสนอบ่อยๆนะครับและอยากใช้ AI เป็นผู้ช่วยในการทำงานให้มีประสิทธิภาพมากขึ้นเปิดรับสมัครแล้ววันนี้ที่เว็บไซต์ Mission Academy คลิกลิงก์ใต้คลิปได้เลยครับ
Hello everyone and welcome to Mission to the Moon podcast. Today we're going to take a step back and look at something bigger than any single headlines. Over the past few weeks, the world has been shaken by a series of protests and uprisings across different continents. What's striking is not just the intensity of each event, but the fact that they happen almost simultaneously. It feels less like isolated news stories and more like a global signal, a sign that something is shifting beneath the surface. This is why in this episode, I want to pause and reflect, not to take sides, but to understand different angles, the deeper causes, and what these events might mean for societies everywhere, including our own. In recent weeks, we've seen protests erupting in places like Nepal, Indonesia. The trigger might look slightly different, might come from a social media ban, political privileges. In the US, we have campus encampments, but the energy behind them feels strikingly familiar. What does this mean when young people in such different society rise almost at the same time? What do these sparks reveal about generations that is quietly but firmly reshaping politics and society? And perhaps most importantly, if something similar were to ignite in our own communities, would we be ready? Let's take a closer look at what happened in each of these places and what lessons might we drawn from them. Firstly, I want to make this clear that Mission to the Moon does not take sides or support any violence act regarding any of these events. My purpose is to explore this matter with you guys, reflect and learn from this event to help us see the world more clearly and to prepare ourselves for the choices ahead. On September 8, 2025, the world attentions turned to Nepal, where Gen Z protests against sweeping social media ban dominated global headlines and sparked heated debate online. Yet that moment was only the beginning. Similar uprisings soon appear elsewhere, spreading like ripples across the pond. What we saw was not just local unrest, but Gen Z rising in different societies almost at the same time, refusing to stay quiet. Let's take a look at the first uprising in Nepal. On September 4th, 2025, the Nepali government announced a ban of 26 social media platforms, saying it was to stop misinformation and cybercrime. For young people, however, cuts off a daily lifeline like WhatsApp to talk with other people, Instagram to showcase freelance work, or YouTube as a classroom, for example. At the same time, the viral Nepal kits that showing politicians' children flaunting wealth felt like an insult to students struggling to find jobs. Within days, peaceful marches turned into mass protests. Imagine you are 21 years old living in Kathmandu. Your brother works in Dubai and sends money back home each month. Your mother depends on his calls to coordinate household expenses. Suddenly, with one announcement, that channel is gone. At the same time, you scroll your feed and you see the children of politicians celebrating wealth as if nothing is going wrong. It's not just a communication that is lost, it's the trust in the states that governs you. This is why what began as a peaceful marches by students carrying signs quickly escalated into something far more intense. Tear gas has filled the streets. Hospital reported young people with rubber bullet wounds. By September 9th, Parliament itself was under attack and the Prime Minister has to resign. The reflection here is clear. When digital platforms become part of the economic backbone, removing them can feel like cutting off an oxygen. And when people see privileges displayed on those very same platforms, the anger became combustible. Oxygen plus fire, and when people lost both fairness and trust, they fight back.
In Indonesia, the spark came directly from lawmakers themselves. Videos of parliament members celebrating new perks while citizens' struggle went viral online. For young Indonesians working long hours in manufacturing and services, these were not harmless gestures. They felt like an insult. Many were already struggling with food and housing costs. Watching representatives applaud their own privileges while ordinary people were asked to sacrifice was the breaking point. Protests spread across Jakarta and other cities. Demonstrators marched not only to the government offices but also to the private homes of the officials. Anger focused on symbols of financial authority. When protests reached the home of finance minister, it was not because his alone caused hardship. It was not because she alone caused hardship. It was because she had come to represent the wider system that many felt was leaving them behind. The president reshuffled his cabinet, removing her in hope of calming the public. Supporters said it showed responsiveness. Critics said it risked physical credibility. But on the street, the message was simple. No reshuffle can fix a system built on privilege. The takeaway is sobering. In an age of hyper-visibilities, even a moment of celebration in parliament can ignite outrages. Inequality is no longer hidden in budget report. It is performed, streamed, and replayed. In that environment, the distance between politics and protests has become dangerously short. We move to another major city in Southeast Asia, Manila. On September 21st, 2025, tens of thousands filled the streets of Manila in what came to known as the Trillion Peso March. The spark was a series of reports exposing alleged corruption in multi-billion peso flood controls projects. For many young Filipinos, the anger was not only about money misuse, it's about trust. Years after Manila floods promise are made, budgets balloon, yet little change on the ground. When documents suggested that contracts were inflated and funneled to political allies, frustration boiled over. The protests quickly spread beyond the capital to Cebu, to Davao, and other cities. Students marched alongside church groups and neighborhood associations. Some carried placards demanding audits and resignation. Others bought pop culture symbols such as Jolly Roger pirate flag from One Piece. A way to say that we are Gen Z and we won't accept this anymore. There were scuffles with police, water cannons, arrests, but the symbolism endured. In a country where nearly 40% of population is under 25, the sight of young people flooding streets to demand transparency carry a weight that no press release could erase. The lessons from Manila echoes those from Kathmandu and Jakarta. When corruption is exposed in high definition and when its costs fall hardest on the young people, whether through their tuition, rent, living expenses, or in this case, flood the street. Anger transforms into generational demand. What looks like a protest about projects is really a cry about futures. When we step back from the headlines, from the violence, from the arrest, a larger pattern comes into view. The spark may look different, but the fuel is still remarkably similar. First, inequality is now hyper-visible. In earlier generations, people may have known inequality existed to newsers, and in earlier generations, people may have known inequality existed, but they do not see it unfold in real time. Gen Z, however, live in a world where politicians' child can post luxury shopping sprees on Instagram, a multi-million-dollar car, while millions scroll past it from cramped apartments. This constant contrast create not just about envy, but sense of being denied something that should be possible. Second, digital platforms are infrastructure. For many young people, losing WhatsApp or something similar to that, it's like losing a bank account, a job board, a classroom at the same time. Governments may see platforms as distractions or risks or just some sort of an outlet, but young people see them as lifelines. Cut those lifelines and backlash is immediate. Third, politics feel unresponsive. Whether it's in Nepal, Indonesia, the Philippines, or elsewhere, traditional parties often appear unable or unwilling to deliver on what Gen Z values. For example, like affordable housing, manageable debt, social justice,
climate action. The result is widening gap between what leaders promise and what young people experience. Both the issues are interconnected. Gen Z doesn't separate foreign policies from domestic survival or climate change from economic inequality. They see them as one system that either works for them or works against them. Fifth, the movements are decentralized. Unlike protests of the past, where normally we have like organizer per se, these uprisings do not have one leader that can be silenced. They are networked, adaptive, and capable of reappearing even after suppression. These patterns suggest that what we are witnessing is not just a set of local crises, but a generational wave, a digital native generation in confronting systems that were built for a different era. And they're doing so on a global stage. The question is no longer whether inequality will spark unrest, but how quickly and in what form it will appear. Emotion and stories show us the human side of this uprising too. But to understand why frustration keeps boiling over, we also need to look at the numbers. There are statistics that reveals the structural pressure beneath protests, such as youth unemployment, soaring housing costs, shrinking opportunities. These figures help explain why what may seem like sudden sparks are actually the result of years of accumulated strain. Globally, the United Nations and World Bank estimate that billions of people are still living on just a few dollars a day, often between $2 and $7. Across most regions, youth unemployment rates remain 2 to 3 times higher than for adults. And in many countries, the cost of housing and education have risen far faster than wages, create pressures that shape what young people believe is possible in their own futures. In Nepal, youth unemployment stands at roughly 21%, while money sent home from overseas workers make up nearly one-third of the nation's income. For millions of families, this means digital platforms are not just for entertainment, they are infrastructure for survival. In the United States, according to Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, more than 22.4 million renter households spend over 30% of income on housing, a record high. In many large metros, a modest two-bedroom now lists near or above $2,000 per month. These pressures form the backdrop against which sparks turn into fires. A platform ban, a viral video of privileges, a student encampment may seem like narrow events, but they land on top of decades of rising costs, narrowing opportunities, and generation that feels constrained. When young people consistently see their futures shrinking, while the wealth of a few is displayed in high definition, unrest is not surprising. The real surprise is that it didn't come sooner. Looking ahead, the risk factors are clear. Countries with large young populations, high inequality, and deep reliance on digital platforms are most exposed. Analysts point to Philippines, to Thailand, to South Africa, and Mexico as places to watch. The exact spark is unpredictable, but the conditions are familiar. The combinations of visible inequality, digital dependence, and generational frustration is not a passing storm. It is a climate, and in that climate, the next eruption is only a question of when and where. We've seen how sparks of unrest spread from Nepal, Indonesia, Philippines, but protests are only half of the story. The other half is how government and society choose to respond once the streets fill with young people demanding change. In simple terms, we can ask what usually fails and what actually helps. The answer breaks down into 4 patterns. The first two show what often goes wrong, approaches that backfire and make unrest worse. The latter two show what has changed to work, structural change and long-term strategies that begin to rebuild trust. First, suppressions usually backfires. Governments that rely heavily on forces often find that it validates protesters' claim. In Nepal, for example, tear gas and bullets deepen the anger. In other countries that we have seen before, calling police on to manage the unrest turned what could have been temporarily distance into a national conversation with civil liberties. Suppressions may restore order for the day, but it erodes trust for years. Second, symbolic gesture rarely lasts. Reshuffling cabinets, announcing investigations, a resignation, or offering small concession can calm the streets for a tiny moment. But when young people have instant access to information, they quickly see through promises that lack substance. Credibility is built not with words but with consistent change. Third, what shows promise as structural reforms? Countries that manage to diffuse unrest often take steps that feel concrete in daily life. Affordable housing initiatives that deliver real units, debt relief programs that reduce lifetime burdens, job pathways that connect students to stable employment. These create visible hope. Policy that protect digital access and privacy also signal that governments recognize platforms as essential infrastructure. And fourth, the balancing act is delicate. Government must maintain public safety, protesters demand fairness and opportunity, business seeks stability. Scholars emphasize long-term reforms. All of these perspectives can be valid once, but tensions arise when one is prioritized at the expense of all others. This is why parallels are often drawn to the late 1960s, another era of student protests and social upheaval. Yet today movement is more global, more connected, and more economically grounded. Technology allows coordination across borders in real time. The frustrations are not only about ideals, but about survival. The real question is not whether unrest can be stopped, but whether it can be redirected. Reform can turn pressure into progress. Refusal to adapt risks rupture. When you look at Nepal, Indonesia, and the Philippines, it becomes clear that these are not isolated incidents. They are signals of broader generational shifts. A new generation is rising, one that is digitally connected, economically pressured, and increasingly unwilling to accept this is just how things are. Government highlights securities and stabilities. Protesters call for fairness and opportunities. Businesses worry about predictability. Scholars remind us of long-term reforms. Each of these perspectives has weight. The challenges of our time is to finding a balance where trust can be rebuilt and futures can be shared. What makes this moment unique is the fact that they echo across continents almost simultaneously. It tells us that young people, regardless of geography, are confronting similar barriers like debt, inequality, climate risks, and political stagnation, while also sharing tools to organize and amplify their voices. We're not simply watching a series of local uprisings. We're watching the emergence of generational climate. In that climate, the sparks may differ, but the fire will keep spreading until systems adapt. And this is where the question turns to us. If young people in other parts of the world can rise almost in unison, what lessons should we take from our own society? What would happen if some frustrations surface here in our communities, in our workplaces, in our school? Would we be ready to listen, or would we wait until the streets give us no choice? This is Rovit Hanusaha from Mission to the Moon channel. We recorded all our podcasts from Bangkok, Thailand. If in the case you listen from other places in the world, you can say hi to us in the comment. I have been doing a Thai version of my podcast for many years now. I want to start doing the English version as well, so it's spread it. Hopefully the topic today can bring us some question, more on debate. Leave us a comment on what you think about this. Thank you and see you in the next episode.
Mission to the Moon. Continue with your mission.
The Meeting Book นะครับเป็นสมุดอีกเล่มหนึ่งที่แนะนำให้พกไว้ที่โต๊ะทำงานว่าจริงๆ Meeting Book เนี่ยมันมีข้อดีเพราะว่าเนื้อหาในการประชุมเนี่ยมักจะค่อนข้างเยอะเราลืมเพราะว่าตอนนั้นมันสำคัญขนาดไหนตอนที่เราประชุมแล้วบางทีเราก็ลืมไปเลยใช่ไหมเราก็ไม่ได้ตามแล้วเรื่องมันก็ตกหล่นไปนะครับถ้าเกิดว่าคุณใช้ Meeting Book เล่มนี้อย่างต่อเนื่องเนี่ยนะครับเพราะว่ามันออกแบบมาเพื่อการประชุมโดยเฉพาะก็จะทำให้ทุกการ Meeting คุณเนี่ยง่ายขึ้นเป็นระเบียบแล้วก็ productive มากกว่าที่เคยอย่างแน่นอนนะครับ